is 2 o'clock, so welcome to Evergreen Reports 101, Running Bibliographic Record Reports. And I will say that this title is mildly misleading. This is more of a 200 to 300 level course. So hopefully, if you have not yet done any of the earlier reports trainings and you would like a refresher on that, those are available in the NC Cardinal YouTube channel. And I definitely recommend that you gain some pretty strong familiarity with the reporter before diving too deep into bibliographic reports. Obviously, if you want to, go for it and jump in wherever you're comfortable starting, and ask questions if you need to. But if you are new to reports, then this just heads up, this is one of the more complicated report types there is out there. But we will take it slow and hopefully answer a lot of questions. And if you do have a question throughout today's training, please feel free to ask it. You can unmute yourself. You can enter a question in chat. I would recommend that if you're going to be asking a question, just raise your hand, even if you'll be typing it, because that'll give me an indicator that somebody's got a question coming. So I'll pause to give you a second to get it out, just so that I haven't moved on ahead before you've finished typing. So feel free to ask questions as we go. And of course, I will pause for questions at the end, and we'll be able to get into anything that maybe you need a little bit of extra walkthrough on. But today we'll be covering bibliographic reports, or bibliographic record reports, and let's go ahead and get into it. The agenda for the day, we're going to start by talking about the cataloging structure. And I'm pretty sure that most of the people in here are very familiar with the cataloging structure. I definitely see a lot of familiar cataloger names in the attendees list. So a lot of that will feel like review, but what we're really going to do is talk about how that structure is applied within the reporter, because of course, the way that the reporter works is that it's pulling data from a lot of different tables, and it's important to understand how these tables are linked together, and a lot of that is very similar to the way that cataloging is structured in Evergreen. So we'll take a look at that. We'll also talk about specifically which tables to use both as your core source and to link out to, depending on the type of report you're trying to run. There are a lot of different reasons that you might want bibliographic record data in a report, and depending on what those reasons are, that can really impact which tables you choose to work with. And it can also impact what you choose to use as your core source, whether you want that to be coming from the bibliographic record table to begin with, or whether you want to start at a different level and link out to the bib record table. We'll also talk about index fields, simple record extracts, and flat mark fields. And if these all sound confusing to you, that's okay. We're going to get into them in detail and talk about what they mean. They're basically different ways that Evergreen pulls data from bibliographic records. And it will do that in a lot of different ways, depending on kind of what your needs are, and for different reasons. So figuring out what you're trying to do with your record or with your report is a really important determinant to which of these different types of fields to use in that report. Next, we will move into some different common errors that you may run into as you're running reports off of bibliographic records, and we'll talk about how to address those. And then finally, we will move into a demonstration, and we'll kind of have some demos throughout this, where when I'm talking about different aspects of the reporter, I'll go into the reporter and show you throughout, but then at the end, we'll actually build a report together. And I do encourage you at that point, if you have the ability to work in Evergreen at the same time as this webinar, I would encourage you to go ahead and log in at that point and build this report along with me. So let's go ahead and get started. And I am going to do, like I said, we'll start with a quick review of the cataloging structure. And so those of you in here who are familiar with with cataloging in Evergreen will recognize this structure. It's basically three tiers. So at the top, we have the bibliographic record. And of course, these are shared amongst all of NC Cardinal, and they are not owned by individual libraries. And that's really the important part to note, because when you are doing a report, you generally want that report to cover the holdings that your library owns. And recognizing that ownership is not at the bibliographic record level is a really important part of putting together that report. Basically, what that means is that you cannot put together a report on the holdings that your library has at only the bibliographic record level. You must link out to a different level. So the next level down, of course, is the volume or call number record. And that's where your holdings come into play. That's where you can actually apply ownership. So your volume or call number record is going to be owned by an individual library. So in almost any report involving bibliographic records, you are going to be linking to a call number table in order to filter by that ownership. Finally, the third level down is the item or copy record. This is the level of cataloging that actually corresponds to a physical item, a physical book. And so it's generally going to be identified by a barcode. A lot of times when you're doing a bibliographic report, you do want item and copy level information in that report. So one of the most common reasons that why you might want bibliographic data in a report is actually because you're creating a copy level report, but you'd like to have bibliographic information such as the title or author connected to the individual data points within that report. So this is important to note because whenever you are creating reports having to do with bibliographic records, you're almost always going to be linking them to call number tables and to item and copy tables. And so that's one of the key things that we're going to talk about today is that linking, and also when do you want to start from the bibliographic level and when do you want to start from maybe an item level and then link back up to the bibliographic level. So any questions about that so far? All right, let's go ahead and talk about those tables themselves. So the first level of our cataloging structure is, of course, the bibliographic record. And so I'm really going to spend more time talking about this table than the other tables. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail here, but I wanted to specifically do that so that you understand what you can do from the bibliographic record table, specifically and individually, and then talk about what you would need to link out to do. So of course, those of you who were at any of my earlier trainings or have some familiarity with reports, when I talk about linking out to a different table, what I'm really talking about is when you have selected your core source. Let's take a quick look at the reporter for this. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a new template within the reporter. And when you do this, you start by selecting a source. So if you start with the bibliographic record table as your core source, you have a number of different options for display fields that are from this table. They are stored in a single basically file within the database. But not everything that you may need is actually stored in this table. There are some things where you're actually going to have to look out to an external table in order to include in your report. And to do that, you have to develop or you have to create a link between your core source and the table you are trying to pull data from. And so you're looking for a similar point of data that both of those tables will hold and created a link from that shared point of data. So within the bibliographic record table, you have available fields of fingerprint, which if you are not familiar with that, that's basically something that's created by Evergreen to identify key pieces of information from the bib record about a particular item. And it generally includes the title, author, and then part information if that data exists. This can be really useful in report output rather than pulling in fields for individually for title and author. But the output won't look as neat. So, there can be a type of report where you don't mind necessarily having a combined field for title and author. And in that case, fingerprint may be the easiest way to get that information, but just be aware that when you're looking at the output for that, you're going to see one column where both of those data points are stored in the same column. And it's also going to have the words, title, and author in it. So it's not going to be super sortable. And it just looks a little bit messy. So it's basically, if this is a report for your own use and you're not going to be sharing it out with other people, and the title and information is sort of secondary to your general need, this is an easy way to get that included. We're going to talk later on about sort of the more standard ways to get title and author information, but this is a really quick one if that's something that you do need. You also have fields for is active and is deleted, and these are both flags that can be turned on or off in Evergreen. So remember, when you delete something in Evergreen, some element of it is always going to be retained in the database. So if you don't want to include deleted records in your output, you have to include the is deleted field as one of your filters and go ahead and mark a filter on that of false. You want to make sure that you are filtering out deleted records or your output's going to be very messy. When I was preparing for today, I was putting together some quick test runs and I forgot to include this flag in one of them. The report took forever to run and it should have only been 1 or 2 lines, but it ended up being several thousand because I had not included that flag. So make sure that you are always including that is delete filter when you're running any sort of bibliographic record report. You also have options for last edit date and time, which is, if you are trying to kind of get an idea of when things were edited or you're looking for things that were recently touched, this is going to be helpful. And this is going to work just like any other date time display field that you may run across on the reporter, where you're able to transform it into different types of dates, whether it's just an exact date or a month and year or something like that. Let's see. The Mark 21 Slim is a little bit, it's an odd one. It basically takes content from a select few mark fields and condenses them into a paragraph. I find it really confusing in output, and I'm not sure how useful it would generally be, unless what you're really trying to do is get a condensed mark record for a large number of different items, and so a report is the way that you've chosen to do that. Frankly, I think the easier thing to do there would be to create a record bucket of the items that you're looking for and print out your report or download your reports from there. But if you're not sure exactly which items to include in that bucket, theoretically, this is a way to kind of get a brief mark record as part of your reporting. But it is a little bit confusing to look at. Just an interesting one that exists in there. A merge date is pretty useful when you're doing any sort of cleanup because it basically tells you the date that a record was merged onto another record. Records that were never merged at all, that were created as they are and have not in any way been merged since then, that will just be blank. So just something to keep in mind with those. Let's see, owner is an important one to think about because as I mentioned earlier, bibliographic records are not owned by specific libraries. They are technically all owned by Cardinal, though there are some some situations where the owner may be listed differently than that. But what it really comes down to is that the owner of the bibliographic record is not in any way correlated with owners of any specific holdings on that record. So as I said earlier, when you see owner within the bibliographic record um, field options, and you're looking for owner as in your library and the holdings it owns, this is not going to get you that. So when we look at our reporter here and I come down here to owner, this is for an org unit, but this is not going to in any way help specify which org unit has holdings on this record. So I would recommend generally probably not using this one at all when you're doing reports. Record creation date and time, of course, this is when it was created. The record ID is in almost every case going to be the same as your TCN value. So these two are generally going to be the same. Share depth is not something that gets used. I have not found anything that has data in here. Like usable data in here. So this is something that you can generally ignore. And then of course the TCN source is set when the record is created. So it's going to be set in most cases to either AutoGen or OCLC, depending on how that record was created and where it came from. So just something to keep in mind that TCN source basically is where that record is coming from. So these are the fields that exist within the bibliographic record table. So when you think about the database that underlies all of Evergreen, every time you create a bibliographic record, Evergreen creates an entry for it in this table that includes all of these pieces. You can include these pieces directly in your reports. Some of them, you may find that they're not terribly useful, but any of these are available to easily include in any report that you create off of a bibliographic record. However, most of the time, you're going to need to go outside of these display fields in order to get a truly usable report. So that's when you really want to think about linking out to other tables. You really can link to anything else in the database. It may take several steps to get there, but you can link pretty much anywhere else that you want to. But the common ones that have a direct link to the bibliographic record are going to be call number. And of course, that's going to be used almost every time you create a report using bibliographic record data, because that's where you can get your library's holdings ownership information. So you're pretty much going to use that every time. And then the rest of these are what we're going to talk about through the rest of this session. And that's fixed field entries, flattened mark fields, index fields, and simple record extracts. These are different pieces of the MARC record that are pulled out from that record to create tables. So depending on how they're pulled out, depending on what those tables are used for in the database, they may look very different. They may have very different types of data included in them. But basically, this is where you're going to find all of that MARC record data. So if you look at the available fields list here, none of this says anything about like title or publication date or anything like that. This is about how the record was created within Evergreen. It's not about the content of the record, except in the Mark 21 Slim, which, as I said, is not a very readable or usable data point, and the fingerprint, which is going to give you your title and author, but not necessarily formatted in a way that makes it super usable in a report. So in order to get that data that is stored in the record itself, you'll need to link out. And the field or the table that you choose to link out to will be dependent on what you're trying to get and what you want it to look like. So that's what we're really going to move into next. So we are going to discuss, let's talk a little bit about the other two levels of the cataloging structure, and then we'll get into what those tables are. So when you think about the cataloging structure, the second level of that is the call number. And as I said, this is where you get ownership. This is where you can actually link your library's holdings to a record. And so it's going to be used in pretty much any bib report you create to limit holdings at your library. But this is also useful if you want to include actual call number data in your output. We've definitely gotten a lot of requests over the years for reports that look at call number ranges and things like that. So this is the table that you would go into to do that. And then from the call number table, you can also link out further to get copy information, so individual barcodes, or even link out to circulation data. To get information about the Dewey classification. So, if you are trying to get specific call number ranges and things like that, you can do that from the bib reports linking out further to Dewey classification. Let's take a look at that real quick. So to link out, if I'm in my bibliographic record as my core source, I just need to come down here to this subtable of call numbers and click on this arrow next to it to expand it. And then from here, I can click on Dewey classification, and this is where you can see what's available for your report, where you can do Dewey blocks. Now, it is difficult to do this in specific ranges where you say, you want to see all the holdings for 200s, 300s, and 400s or something like that. You're going to get them you'll get all the holdings for 200s, all the holdings for 300s, all the holdings for 400s in your output with this. But you can do some interesting things with Dewey numbers by linking out to this Dewey classification. So you're going sort of 2 sub-levels below your bib record. So starting from bib record into call number and then Dewey classification, or starting from bib record into call number and then copies. And from here you can get, your barcode information and your circulating library and things like that. And then of course you can, when you're doing this owning library filter, you can do that filter directly from the call number table. So if I'm in the call number table, I can choose owning library here. But those of you familiar with the reporter will recognize that this little tree means that if I include this as a filter, I'm going to be able to filter by my library. But if I include it as a display field, the data point that will be displayed in my output will actually be a number, the numeric code that is used to identify my library within Evergreen. And so unless you happen to know your number and you're sharing this report only with other people who know their numbers, that's actually probably not useful. So another link out that you may want to do from call number is to come down here to the owning library subtable. And from here, you can actually include your library's name in your output, which is just a little bit more readable. So that's your level 2 options, basically what you may want to link out to and why you might want to get additional data from the call number itself. And then of course your level 3 is the item level. So your item level table is going to be useful in bib reports for a lot of different things. Barcodes are probably the big one, but then also shelving locations and then local information about creation and activation dates. So hopefully you recall that when you were looking at the display fields available in the bib record, you have creation date and edit date. That is for the bib record itself. So if your library created their copy of an item attached to a bib record at a significantly different time than that bib record was created, you'll probably want your local creation date in there. And that you'll find through the item level table. You can also link out further to get circulation data and hold in transit data. So let's take a look at that really briefly. So if I'm under bibliographic record, I need to go to my second level of call number, and then from there, my third level of copies. So I have all of my copy information here, or I can expand my copy table and link out from there to circulation information, holds information, shelving locations, so I can get the actual name of the shelving location. Things like that are all going to be available by going from bib to call number to copy and then linking out further from there. In general, you're going to link, you can link either starting at the item level and link up to bib by going item to call number to bib. So item would be your core source. Or you can do what we've just been looking at, which is starting from the bib as your core source and then going down to call number and then further down to item. So either of those options are going to be useful for you. What you really want to do is think about what your goal with this report is and the types of fields that you'd like to include in it. I generally feel that the less linking you have to do, the better that is for the reporter. It's going to run more quickly if you don't have to do too much linking between tables. So if you know that you want a large amount of copy level information, then you may want to start from the item table. Whereas if you know you want a large amount of bibliographic record information, you may want to start from the bibliographic record table. You want to think about which of those two levels has the most amount of data that you'd like to include in your output or filter on. And that's where you'll start based on that. So today we're primarily going to be starting from the bibliographic record level and then linking down, but it's certainly possible to do it the opposite way depending on what your needs are. Are there any questions about those tables? Let's see. So Forrest has asked, going back to the Dewey classification table, where does that information come from? It wouldn't be the call number label as that's in a different table. So this is something that is created by a process in the database that I could not, I don't think I could explain at this moment. I haven't played with it enough looking directly at the database, but most of the stuff that we deal with when we're talking about bibliographic records is stuff that is created by Evergreen based on input that people put into it, as opposed to just directly pulled from data that is created by a user. And the Dewey classification table is one of those where it's going to be created through a process that the database runs. Not looking at it right now, I'm not sure exactly what that process would look like. Llewellyn may have some ideas, so if he does and he's in here and would like to comment on that, go for it. But my guess is that it has something to do with the creation of a table by a process of sort of pulling data from a variety of other tables at the database level.
There's like some instances where that happens. I don't know about Dewey specifically. I've never really looked into it, but yeah, there are tables that are built off of like once a MARC record is imported. Um, but yeah, I can look for Dewey specifically if you want.
We will see what we can find and share that back because I have not looked into that much either. So good question. All right, any other questions about any of the tables or kind of how they link together at this point? All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. And if you do come up with any of those questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in chat and we will address them as they come up. So the next thing that we're going to be talking about are the different types of tables that are available to get information directly from the record. So as I said, when you're looking at the bibliographic record table within the reporter, all of these different display field options that are available here in this middle pane really have more to do with the creation of the record and how it was created rather than the content of the record. So in order to get the content, this is one of those things where Evergreen is actually kind of doing a process to the information that the user has put in and creating a bunch of different tables based off of that. And it does this differently and results in different information depending on what it does with those tables and how they are used. So we're going to take a look at a few of them and talk a little bit about how they're created and what they're used for and when you might want to choose this to include in your report versus when you might want to choose a different one. So the first one we're going to talk about are flat fields, and this is a little confusing. Let's take a look at it in the reporter itself. Let me close up all this stuff. So it's confusing because you have two different things here that kind of have the word flat. You have flat display entries and you have flattened mark fields. So when I'm talking about flat fields, and I will try my best to say flat when I'm talking about this and flattened when I'm talking about the other, but I will probably mix it up at least once because it's confusing. But basically, what is happening when you're working with a flat field is that Evergreen creates these by taking data from a MARC record, and instead of creating a table where it is a single record each line and a column for title and a column for author and a column for creator, instead it is a single line for title, and then it's going to have the title proper, the actual text of what the title is, and then a couple of different codes that are applied to that. And so a single bibliographic record in Evergreen may have, 20 different rows in the flat fields table. So that can be really confusing. And this is actually the source of one of the most common errors that people have when working with bibliographic records, is that they get duplicate lines for the same item over and over again. And it's often because they've chosen a flat field. And so they're getting one line for the title and one line for the author. But it's just duplicating much of the same data over and over again. So this is probably one of the biggest points of confusion that I have seen people have with bibliographic record reports. So one of the things to think about when you're looking at flat fields is that there are two specific things that you need to include when trying to work with one of these tables in your report, and that's the label and the value. So this is similar to something else which is called the compressed display entries, which functions the same way. If you look over here in the source path, you'll see label, name, and value all as different options. You're going to see the same thing within your flat display entries: label, name, and value. Now, the main difference between the compressed and the flat in terms of output concerns is that Evergreen is creating different data types with compressed and with flat, and the compressed ones don't play very nicely with the reporter. So in general, you don't need to know a lot about what's happening under the hood. Just know that often if you tried to choose a compressed display entry, your report is likely going to fail because the reporter doesn't work well with the data type that's created by that. The flat display entry, on the other hand, is going to give you the same output that would technically come from the compressed display entry, but it's going to do it in a way that is readable for the reporter. I know that's confusing, but just if you need to remember anything else about it, nothing else about it, just remember that you want to choose flat display entry, not compressed display entry, if you're working with this particular type of field. Now, one of the things to be aware of when working with this type of table is that you have to use both a display field and a filter to get this to work. So your display field will be the value. So if we're actually creating one of these and we're in the flat display entries, we're going to choose value here as our display field. So I will add that field here, and this is what's actually going to show up in my output. But if I don't filter at all, then I'm going to get a different row for every time there is a value for the particular record that's being pulled up, which means I could get 20 some rows for a single record, and that's going to get really confusing. So in addition to choosing value, I also have to filter to tell Evergreen specifically which row I want to see. So basically, if I want to see the value of the title in my output, So let's change this column label to title so that when I see the output, I know what I'm looking at. If I wanted to see the title in my output, I would want to put the value into my display field, and then I'd want to come into the filters, and I'd want to choose name, and I'd want to put that in as my filter, and then I'd want to hard code title as the filter type. So basically I'm saying I want to see the value of the line for this particular MARC record that's coming up in this report for only the line that is called the title. That's a really confusing way to do this. But this is actually a useful table to be aware of. It is useful for particular two particular fields that will come out better using this method of pulling up the data than any of the others. And those are genre and geographic subject. So if you are running a report on a genre, then I would recommend your flat display entry as the best way to get that genre information. It's available for some of the others, but you're going to get the best formatting of it through this one. So when we actually do a demo later, we'll include that in here so you'll see it in action. But basically just remember, if you're using a flat display entry, first of all, don't use the compressed one. Second of all, always use both a field and a filter so that you can determine which specific row you would like to have included. Does anybody have any questions about those? I know that this one's probably actually the most confusing, so it'll get a little easier from here. Let's see, Forrest has asked why this is the genre and geographic subject. Do you mean why they're formatted best within the flat display entry table? I'm not entirely sure why. What I can say is that the mechanism that creates them best is that you're going to get the exact, the flat display entry is an exact pull from what somebody has put into the MARC record. So they're going to be formatted following Library of Congress subject heading, subject and genre heading formatting. Because Evergreen does not do anything to like normalize them, which in these other field types that we're going to look at, they're normalized, which actually takes away that formatting. So in the end, it's not that big of a deal. You know, you're still going to get the word romance for the genre, but it's not going to have a capital R. I'm not entirely sure why normalization has that specific effect, but there's a process that Evergreen applies to these fields in these in the the other tables called normalization that does change the formatting. Oh, Marsh Llewellyn has shared a some stuff about Dewey, so feel free to go ahead and look at that now, and we can actually come back to it later on and kind of dig into it as well. Right. Yeah. All right. So I hope that kind of cleared up things about the genre and geographic subject. Like I said, it's not going to change the actual content, so you'll get that if you do a different entry type. This is just going to be the one that preserves the Library of Congress formatting. All right. So that is the flat display fields. And like I said, that's probably the most complicated one that we're going to look at today. The next one we're going to look at is the flattened MARC fields. So I just talked about normalization. The flattened MARC fields will normalize the values that it takes. So basically it means it's going to take away formatting. A couple of other things happen through normalization, but the big thing is formatting changes. This one is also going to require both a display field and a filter. So just like with the flat display fields, you're going to have to set both a display field and a filter in order to use it. I think this one's a little bit easier to work with simply because you're thinking of it as a mark record when you're doing it. So your filter is on the tag and subfield, which makes a little bit more sense, I think. But basically what you're working with here with these flattened mark fields is the same as what we were talking about with the flat display fields, in that you are looking at a table where Evergreen has taken data from the bib record, and each different data point gets a full row within the table that's created for this, which means, once again, if you were to not filter, you would get a separate row for each mark field or each mark tag within a record for an item. So an item could have multiple rows related to it, which sometimes, if what you really want is just the full mark record for a specific item, you could use this to get that. Probably not the best way to get it, simply because, you could just go look directly at the mark record, but it is an option. But this is useful if you really kind of want to see, if you're doing any sort of catalog cleanup and you want to see specific things in specific fields. If you're looking for, um, if you're looking for specific mistakes that would be included in, a 100 level field or an 035 field. This is how you can create a report that's going to run just that field for you. So let's take a look at this. It's easier to see than to explain. So if we go into the reporter, and I'm just going to remove what I have so far. And instead of being in the flat display entries, now I'm going to come down here to the flattened mark fields. I'm going to put in my normalized value. This is what I want to see in my output. And then I'm going to go into the filters, and I'm going to include a tag and a subfield. So I'm going to put in my tag, and I'm going to put in my subfield. I don't want the normalized value. I did that by accident. And once again, I'm going to hard code at this point. And so when I say hard code, what I mean is that I'm setting the definition of my filter in the template rather than at the report step. And generally, I don't recommend doing that. But when working with a bib record report, that can actually sometimes be a good idea. So you have one report that is the report that's always looking for the 035 field. So you hard code the filter for 035 directly into this report so that or directly into this template so that this report will always run specifically on that mark field. So I'm going to do that as my example here, and I'm going to change my filter value by right-clicking on the line for tag. I'm going to click change filter value, and I'm going to just set it to 035. And so for my subfield, I'll do the same thing. I'll right-click on subfield and select change filter value, and I'll set that as A. And so now what's going to happen is I'm going to get a report that is going to pull only the 035A field from the mark record as a single line for my item, and it's going to display the content of that field in my output. Now, obviously, when you're running this report for real, you're going to have significantly more display fields than this. I want my 035 here, but let's say I also want to have, my title and my author and my barcode or something like that. I can put all of that in here for a display field, but I cannot choose another flattened mark field for this. I have filtered to only want to see the 035A, and that's all I'm going to see. So it doesn't matter how many of these display fields for a normalized value I put in. Actually, the reporter won't let me put in more than one, but if it did, I could put in 5 of these. I'd still only get the OCLC number for all of them because that's what I have filtered to. So you cannot create a report that's at least not easily, that's looking at multiple different mark fields. So what you're going to want to do is create a single report that looks at a specific mark field, and then fill in the rest of your display fields from either an indexed or a simple record extract. And those are what we're going to talk about next. And just taking a quick step back, Llewellyn did say in the chat that the reporter's Dewey table is generated on the fly by transforming the call number label using an algorithm. And he shared the link to the algorithm that does that. So that's how that is created. So that's fun to know. All right, so your flattened mark field functions similarly to your flat display entry, but rather than taking a specific type of display entry and with a name attached to it, you can get anything from your mark field, and you do that simply by identifying the tag that you want to filter to. But both of these do require both a display field and a filter in order to function. And they're mostly going to be useful for the non-standard pieces of information that would be available in a MARC record. So if you're looking for author, title, publication year, that type of thing, these are available much more easily from either the indexed fields or the simple record extracts. So you're mostly going to be using the flattened mark fields as a cleanup option. So if you're running a report to try to clean up specific fields, this would be a good choice to help you with that. The flat display entries is generally useful for a non-standard part of the record that you don't want normalized. You will get a line. So Joy asked, what if the mark field has more than one 035As? You will get a separate line for each of them. So if you have a single record that has three 035As, you will have 3 lines for that record. So just be aware that you may get duplications for this. It's not an error in the report. It has to do with how that item was cataloged and how many instances of that tag and subfield show up in the MARC record. All right, so we have talked about the 2 more complicated options, which are these flat fields. Next, we're going to talk about the index fields, and this is starting to get a little easier because indexed fields don't require both a display field and a filter to function. They are created within the database actually as part of the search functionality. So when you create a MARC record or upload it into Evergreen, you basically are giving Evergreen all of the data about a piece of, about something that is being held in the library. And the search function then crawls that MARC record using these indexed fields. So what you're really doing here, or what Evergreen is really doing here, is creating searchable fields from the MARC record. So it's doing that for author, identifier, keyword, series, subject, and title. And here's the tricky part. Many of these will show up multiple times for the same record. Keyword, subject, especially, you're going to get a lot for that because it basically, Evergreen has a certain number of parts of the MARC record that it's going to scan through to pull out potential things that somebody could search for in any one of these areas. So if you go into the catalog search, basically these indexed fields are these. So your title, your author, your subject, and your series. These correspond with these indexed fields in the reporter. So this is a little easier to work with, but be aware that the output may not always match what you expect it to be. So let's take a quick look at this. So this is a report that I ran the other day where I am looking at a single record. So you see this TCN value is the same. I think I did only a single TCN. So this entire report, oh, no, yep, this entire report is for the exact same record. And it's long. So I have basically different values for, I think I just chose subject term here. which means that I'm getting every potential subject term and also every potential title, because some of these have just the Witching Tide, some have the Witching Tide, a novel. And then of course I also included the owning library, so that's probably one reason I have so many. But in the end, I'm getting a huge number of results all for the same record, because I'm getting a different line for each potential subject term. Um, and there are quite a lot of them in this particular record. So index fields are really helpful um, for kind of pulling out some of these, some of the different kind of standard parts of a MARC record, but they also result in duplication pretty much every time. Now, there is a way to avoid that duplication that we'll look at, but it will also reduce the amount of data that you have, which may not be your goal. So it's just the only thing that I actually recommend you use the index fields for are the subjects, and just be aware that those subjects you're going to get multiples of. So earlier I said those flat display entries are useful for genre and for geographical subject. That's because genre is not actually included in the indexed fields, and geographic subject cannot be pulled out separate from the rest of the subjects. So I recommend using that flat display field for those two specific aspects of the field, of the MARC record. But when you're looking for just subject terms in general, the index field is a little bit easier. So I would recommend that. But that's really the only thing that I recommend using the index fields for. I suppose series is also useful, though most of my attempts to run a report on series, because there's so much non-standard, so many non-standard entries for series, that those reports get pretty unwieldy pretty quickly. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you run an indexed field on keyword, you're going to get a lot of data, because you're going to get, you'll get subject terms. You'll also get, the entire like publisher's description, as well as a few other parts of the MARC record in your output. So just be aware that if you do run an indexed field report on keyword, expect some pretty hefty output. I would recommend avoiding author or title here, because you're going to get duplicates when you really don't need those duplicates. Just as we're seeing within this, we're seeing that we have both the Witching Tide and the Witching Tide, a novel, coming out as our index title fields. Most likely I'm going to want a normalized value of that just gives me the Witching Tide, a novel, and does not give me the Witching Tide. And I can do that through simple record extracts, and that's what we're going to look at next. Do we have any questions about the index fields? Identifier is not useful, is what it is. It's not the ISBN. I'm not I think it pulls from a bunch of different fields. And probably does include ISBN, but it is not just ISBN. I assumed that's what it would be before I worked with it, and that's not what it is. I may have an output that includes that somewhere. I don't have it in here. But identifier can come from, it can almost certainly come from the 020, the 035, and maybe a few other places. Yeah. So identifier seems like it'd be a really helpful one, but unfortunately it's not. All right, any other questions about the indexed fields? We can take a quick look at how to work with those and what they actually look like in the reporter. So if I'm in here in my template and I come into my indexed author field entries, I would just choose value, and I can put that in as my display field, and that's all I need to do. I don't need to further filter. I did say that there was a way that you could reduce duplication. So if I were to choose the subject field for my display, I could add that down here, and I'm going to get a different row for each subject term. So if if there are 6 different subject terms attached to this bib record, I'm going to get 6 rows. I can reduce that by changing my transform to first value or last value. And so that's going to reduce that duplication, but then I'm only going to get a single subject term. And if what I'm really looking for is all the subject terms connected to a title, that's not really useful for me because I'm only going to get the first one. So just keep that in mind. Let's see, Deborah asked, what if you need to find a particular author? What do you recommend to use? And that's what we're going to look at next, is the best way to do title and author information. So we've kind of like whittled down, we've started at the most complicated and we're moving to the simplest. And the simplest is the simple record extracts. So let's talk about these because this is going to be the easiest way to get the most common information that you want. So the simple record extracts are basic bibliographic information that Evergreen pulls from the MARC record and normalizes, just like with those index fields, but it's not doing it for the sake of searching. The problem with the index fields in a report is that that table is not created for reporting. That table is created for searching. So it includes everything. Whereas the simple record extracts, this table is created for reporting. So it basically normalizes the data in the MARC record and makes it usable in a report. They are a lot more like flattened fields in terms of what they look like in the output, but they don't require that extra step of setting the filter. They're only available for a few specific fields, so author is one of them. So Deborah, this is what you would use if you're looking for a specific author. Fingerprint, and we talked about this earlier, that's where you have the single column that has both title and author, as well as part if that's included. You can get to this directly from the bibliographic record table, so you don't necessarily have to come down here to the simple record extract to get it, but it is available here as well. ISBN or ISSN, publication year, publisher, your TCN, which is available lots of other places, and then, of course, your title. And this is where I recommend you go for this data, because you're going to get the best version of the well-formatted content within the record. You're not going to get as much duplication. I think you probably still can sometimes, but I don't actually see duplication when I run these. I just don't want to tell you you'll never see a duplicate. Unfortunately, it's not available for subject terms, which is why, if you are looking for those subject terms, you want to use the indexed option. And then, of course, it's not available for genre. So if you want genre, you want to use that flat display field. But this is where you can do both a display field of your title and author. And if you did want to filter for a specific author, you can do this by adding the author as a filter. You want to make sure that you're putting the exact correctly formatted author name. There are some ways that you can kind of fiddle with that. So if I were to add a filter of author from my simple record extracts, I could come in here and I could say that I want to transform this to all lowercase. And so then I don't have to worry that my capitalization is exactly correct. You could also do a substring and set your filter to be only the last name. That would probably work. I have not actually tried it myself, but my guess is that that would work. But this is how you could run a report for a specific author. Does that answer your question, Deborah? Okay, great. So we started complicated, we got a little simpler. Simple record extracts is the first place you should go when you're looking to have this kind of bibliographic record information in your output. If what you're looking for your output is not available in here, then kind of work yourself back up. Look at the index fields. Is what you're looking for available there? If it's not, then look at that, either your flattened MARC field or your flat display. Flattened MARC field is useful if you don't care that much about the formatting, whereas the flat display is useful if you do care about the formatting. Um, let's take a look at what this looks like. So this is that um, same TCN with the um, pulling the data from the simple record extract versus the indexed field. So in my index field, I didn't include author in here for some reason, but you see I have two different values for my title. Simple record extracts, I only have one, and it's this fully normalized one of The Witching Tide, a novel. The same thing is happening with author. You don't see it in the index because I didn't include that, but if I had included author in here, I'd get different versions of the author's name, depending from where in the record it's being pulled. Whereas in this case, I'm getting a specific normalized version of that author's name. So it's cleaner and you're not going to get as much duplication. In fact, I don't think I have any duplication here, which I can kind of tell because I have the barcode. And so I can see that I don't think I have the same barcode more than once here. The only reason I have multiple rows is because I've included this sort of copy level information of the owning library and the barcode. All right, so those are our fields. When we're creating bibliographic record reports, that's basically what we're working with, are our fields either directly within the bibliographic record table, fields pulled from a link out to a call number or a copy table, and then fields from these four different tables, which are the flat display entry, the flattened mark field, the indexed fields, or the simple record extracts. Are there any questions about that? And I know that it's complicated, and I know you may still be kind of trying to figure out what I'm talking about. And I'm hoping that as we put one together, that all kind of comes together. But any questions right now? All right. Well, so as I said before, use simple record extracts for title, author, ISBN, publication year, and publisher. Those are the best way to get the sort of non-duplicated, fully normalized version of all of those. Use index fields for subject headings. And then also if you're looking for issues within a record, you might want to compare multiple authors or multiple title entries. And if that's the case, then the index field is going to be better for that than the simple record extract, because you will see every version of that is included within the record. For anything else, flattened mark field or flat display field, you can kind of choose which one is going to be best for you based on kind of what you're hoping that output looks like. Let's talk about some common errors and then let's create a report. We've got about half an hour left, which should be just enough time. So the common errors that we're going to see when we try to run a bibliographic record report are going to be failed reports. That's obviously the biggest error there is. Empty output, duplicate data, or unexpected output. And as I said before, duplicate data is usually the result of having duplicate entries within or duplicate indexed fields. It can also be the result of, having multiple 035As, for example, like we saw with the flattened mark. The others can happen for a number of reasons. So, oh, go back. So a failed or broken report is generally going to trigger a message to the email address that you supplied when you created the report. And this message will tell you that the report failed. And then it's going to provide a long block of code that you won't be able to do much with. You can provide that to us at the Cardinal team, and we can tease out what may have broken. What I will say is that the only broken report that I've seen really consistently when working with bib record reports involves the compressed display fields. Like anything else has been something like a weird little thing that I've done that I haven't necessarily done more than once. I did, one time in one attempt, and then I didn't see it again. But the only thing that's going to be a consistent failure point is going to be if I use the compressed display entries. We talked about the idea that the compressed display entries and the flattened display entries are essentially the same, except the compressed creates a data type that the reporter doesn't like. So just don't use the compressed. And if you don't do that, hopefully you're not going to have any fails. If you do, send them my way and I'll take a look at them, or I will ask Llewellyn to help me. Um, let's see. The empty output is actually probably more common than an actual just failed report. Oh, so Deborah has asked the correct way to enter record creator. You would want to, I've never done a report like that, but my instinct would be that you would want to put in your database ID. So if you look at your account in Evergreen, if you go up to the URL, you'll see a string of numbers, and that number is your database ID. If you need help finding it, let me know and I'll pull it for you and email it to you. And I think that's probably it, but I have not actually tried to run a report looking for record creator, so that's just a guess, but we can take a look at that. So yeah, I'll look into that and I'll get back to you at the end of this, okay? Um, yeah, everything has an ID in the background. The display that you see isn't necessarily the same thing as how it's stored. So yeah, sometimes something like that where you put the wrong type of information for a specific filter is going to create a failed report as well. So just something to keep an eye out for. Empty output is fairly common with bibliographic records reports, and it's generally the result of an incorrectly applied tag or subfield. So let's see, I think I have an example. Give me a second, I can pull that up. Okay, so this is an empty one. And I think what I did here is that I think I put in like 0020 or something like that for my mark tag. And that doesn't exist. That's not a real mark tag. So there's no data associated with it. So I didn't get anything in my output. So basically, if you get nothing, if you get an empty output, then I would recommend first thing you do, if you used flattened mark fields at all, go back and make sure that you have put the correct number formatted correctly, which means you have to have that, if it's 020, you have to have 020. You can't just have 20. That's the most common thing that I've seen that leads to an empty output in bibliographic record reports. Duplicate data, on the other hand, is simply the most common error that we see with these types of reports. This is where I get the most questions when people are trying to figure out what's going wrong with their bib report. As I said earlier, this is something that is probably a result of multiple entries for the same mark field. Or it could be like we saw with the indexed fields one, it could be the result of simply pulling out an index field for which there are many, many things. When Evergreen indexes a bib record for searching, it wants to pull out anything that somebody could search for. So there's going to be multiple entries for the same record. So it's not uncommon to see that, and it doesn't even mean you've done anything wrong. It's just something to be aware of when you're putting these reports together, is that depending on the type of field that you're including, you're very likely to get multiple entry points for the same record. Sometimes you don't want that, and so if you want to avoid that, you can do that first value thing that we looked at a moment ago for your transform, and that's going to remove the duplicates, but then of course you also won't see every potential entry for something. So you have to determine what it is you're trying to get out of your output. And then of course, unexpected output is just something that you have to worry about with any particular report. It could be the result with bib record reports. It could be the result of a number of issues. One issue that does kind of come to mind for me involves index keywords. So I said earlier that the index keyword field can pull from a lot of different parts of the MARC record. That does include the 500. So you could get some pretty hefty output when you are looking for that particular index. If you include this field expecting to get a list of controlled vocabulary, you're just not going to get that. You're not getting actual keywords. You're getting the part of the MARC record that Evergreen is using to search or to compare keyword searches against, which includes quite a lot. Other types of unexpected output might be, if we look at some of these that we've got up here, might be sort of something like this where you have multiple different entries for a title and you didn't expect that. It may be that you were hoping to get specifically genre information and you're getting significantly more than that. It may be that you were looking for a common one that you may see is that you were looking for your library's holdings and you put in owner, but you put in owner from the bib record level. And so you're not seeing your library's holdings, you're seeing everyone's holdings. Or you're seeing no one's holdings because you limited it down to basically an org unit that does not hold any bib records because individual org units aren't supposed to. So basically just kind of go back and think about what you put in and what you thought that might bring up versus how it might actually be stored on the database, because those two things don't always match. All right, so we have talked a lot, but I would like to actually get in and show you how to do some of this. Before I do that, are there any questions that anybody has at this point? I'm going to go ahead and just clear out all of these example things that we did so that we can start from scratch. And we are going to create a template from the bibliographic record level. And basically the report that I'm hoping to run right now is one that will list all of the adult fiction books in a specific library by title, author, TCN, barcode, and owning library, as well as genre. So what I want to do is see everything within adult fiction and then see all of the different subgenres that I have available in, my library that are shelved in adult fiction. And I'm going to start that from the bibliographic record core source. Now I could actually change this to item as my core source, and I could start from here and I could link out to the bibliographic record. So what I need to do is think about where is most of the information that I want in my output going to be stored, and where's most of the information that I'll be filtering against stored? Is it stored at the item level or close to the item level, or is it stored at the bibliographic record level and close to the bibliographic record level? So if I'm thinking about title, author, TCN, those are all going to be at the bibliographic record level, as well as, of course, genre. If I think about owning library, that's going to be at the call number level, and that is the same amount of linking whether I start at bibliographic record or item. And then barcode is at the item level. That's the only thing in my display that's going to be at the item level, and it's not something I'm filtering on. So I think it's probably going to be less taxing on the server and on the reporter for me to start from the bibliographic level than to start from the item level. Either of them will work, but it is more efficient to start from the bibliographic level because more of my output comes from that table. So I'm going to come back up here and make my core source bibliographic record. And I'm going to start at the actual bibliographic record and take a look at my source path in here. And I know that I want a couple of things from here. First of all, I want is deleted to equal false because, I want that as a filter. Because of course I don't want to include any deleted records in my output. So I'm going to go ahead and hard code this to say false. I'm going to remove it from my display field too. Then I also want to make sure that I'm including my TCN. So I'm going to take that from my bibliographic record table itself and add that field. The next thing that I want to do is be able to filter on owning library. So to do that, I'm going to link down here to my call number table. And I'm going to do two different things here. First, I'm going to set my filter to owning library, and I'm taking this directly from the call number table. I'll add that field and I'll change my operator to enlist. So those of you familiar with the reporter, you'll know that when you change your operator to enlist, it means that when you set up the actual filters, you'll be able to choose multiple options for this. So I can choose every branch within my system, or just a single one, or just one or two. But I've done that from the call number table directly. Now I'm going to go back to my display fields in this tab here, and from call number, I have somehow lost, there we go. I'm not sure what happened there. I lost my little arrows to expand. From call number, if I include this owning library field that I used for my filter, I'm going to get an actual code, like a 3-digit code for my library in my output. And that's not very useful for me. I want to make sure that I see my library's name in my output. So I actually want to go down a level from call number to the owning library subtable. And from here, I'm going to choose name and include that as my display field. So it looks like Mary asked if I can choose circulating library from the call number table. Let's see. So no, circulating library is not in the call number table. You would have to come down here to copies, and you can choose circulating library from the copy table. So you'll have to do a second link. Which is fine. It's certainly okay to do, to link down multiple levels. All right. So at this point, we have our TCN and our owning library, both as a filter and a display field. Let's go ahead and get my barcode in here since I'm already in the copy table. I'm going to grab the barcode from here and just add that into my display fields. And then let's start thinking about the actual bib record data that I want to show up. At this point, I've only included things that are kind of static within Evergreen. Now I want to go into those dynamic tables that Evergreen creates based on my bibliographic records. So I'm going to close up this call number. And we're going to start by getting that genre field in. So this is the most complicated one that we're doing here. I'm going to come into my flattened mark field and, oh, I'm sorry, my flat display entry. I told you I'd make that mistake at least once. My flat display entry. And this is one of those where I have to set both a display field and a filter to make it work properly. So for my display field, I'm going to choose value. And I'm going to go ahead and change the column label on this to genre so that when I see my output, I know that's what this column is. I'll probably figure it out pretty quickly looking at the content of it, but I'm going to go ahead and change it. Then I'm going to go into my filter tab here. And I'm going to choose name. Now you can choose either label or name. I prefer name because it does not have any capitalization. It's all lowercase. So I don't have to worry about making sure that my capitalization matches what the database has. Whereas label is going to be capitalized. And if I do it wrong, then it might choose the wrong thing, or more likely I'd get no output. So I'm going to go with name because it's unformatted. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to my filters. And then once again, I'm going to hard code this. So I left owning library as something that I'm going to set when I set up my report, but deleted is hard-coded. It's always going to be equal to false. I'm going to do the same thing here with my genre because the point of this report is to include genre information. So I just want that to live at the template level. It does not need to be set every time I run this report. So I'm going to change my filter value to genre. And so now when I get my output, I will get a single line that includes genre. If the particular bib record that I run this report against has multiple genres listed, I'll get however many lines there are genres listed in the bib record. So just, it's not actually going to be a single line per TCN. It'll be multiple lines depending on the number of genres there are. But it will only be based on genre. I won't get a single line for every single part of the MARC record, only the part that I've filtered for in genre. All right. Next, I'm going to add some simple record extracts. So I'm going to come down here. So I'm still in these sort of subtables under a bibliographic record, and I'm going to choose simple record extracts. And I want to include title. So I'm going to choose title proper and add that to my display fields. And I'm going to choose author and add that as well. So at this point, I know I've got my output basically set up. I'm going to have my TCN. I'm going to have my owning library, my barcode, my genre, my title, and my author. But remember, I also wanted this to be a report specifically of adult fiction, so I can see which genres are available within adult fiction. So to do that, I'm going to come back up here to my call number subtable, and I'm going to expand that out, and then come down to copies and expand that out again. And under copies, I'll find shelving location. So I had to go pretty far down to get to this one. For my shelving location, I'm just going to include name, and I'm going to put that in here under my display fields so that I see my shelving location. Additionally, I want to be able to filter on that shelving location. So I'm going to go under filter, and I'm going to choose location ID for this one and add that as my filter. So just like we talked about earlier, everything in Evergreen has sort of an ID number underlying it. And when I'm setting up my filter, I'm going to use that ID as the filter point. And what's nice is that when I do set up the report, I'm not going to see the numbers. I'm going to see the actual words associated with it. So I'll recognize what I'm looking at. But this does allow me to choose multiple. If I chose name, I don't actually have the ability to get that nice little in list option, which is what I want to see. So I'm going to change my operator here to in list. And so now I can filter down to adult fiction. I'm not going to hard code that. Theoretically, I may want to rerun this same report to look at, juvenile fiction or young adult fiction or something like that. So I'm not going to hard code it. I've just set that up at the report level. All right, so at this point, I think we are ready to go. We have set up display fields of TCN, owning library. Let me change this column label to owning library. Barcode, genre, title, author, and then let's also change this one to shelving location. I can change the order here a little bit, and I probably would want to if I was doing this for actual use, but I'm not going to bother with that right now. It's a little fiddly. Filters, I'm hard-coded that none of the output should be deleted. Is deleted equals false. I'm going to be able to set which library which owning library I'd like to include when I set up the report. I have filtered specifically to pull out genre from my flat display entries. And I have my shelving locations set as a filter that I can select which shelving locations I'd want when I set up the report. So I think we're ready to go. I just have to give it a title. So I'm just going to call this training report genres. And we'll save it. Any questions before I hit OK? All right, let's see what happens. All right, so this is my template. I need to set it up to run now. So I'm going to come in here to my templates. I'm going to click select training report genres. That's the template I just created, and create a new report and click submit. I'm just going to call this training report genres. I'll choose pack just because that's the workstation I am on as my owning library. And then I'm going to come down here to adult fiction. And you can see my other hard-coded filters are showing up here. I can't do anything with them, but is deleted equals false. And flat display entry name is genre. I'm going to put this in the correct folders, both for the report and for the output, and save the report, and this will trigger it to run. Now, I did create the same report yesterday, so if this one does not run quickly, we can take a look at the output I did yesterday. Okay, let's just take a look at that. So we'll view my report output from yesterday. And so I have basically, I've got my owning library, my TCN, my barcode, title author, my genre, and this of course was that flat display entry. Oh, and I did include subject terms in the one I did yesterday. I didn't do that today. So what we're seeing is that I do have some duplication. I can tell it's definitely a duplicate because the barcodes are the same, and that's one of the main reasons that I include barcode. Uh-oh, not enough memory. Let's try that one more time. We can actually look at the one I've just created. Maybe that's got a little bit less memory. Because I didn't include the subject term, so it might be a little bit smaller. But one reason to include barcode in a report like this is because then you can definitely tell if something is a duplicate entry or if you just have multiple copies or something like that. So I do like to include the barcode. The TCN will do the same thing. All right, my computer is not happy with this particular report output. But by doing that flat display entry and limiting it down to genre, I was able to get those genre terms. So Joy asked if you wanted to create a report that lists all the items of a particular genre. That is possible. Basically, you would have to do the same thing we just did. Here, let's pop back into that template. So the same thing that we just did, but you'd have to add a second filter. It would be very similar to the flat display entry filter that we added, but instead of the name, we would actually be filtering on value. It is tricky though, because there's not going to be a code for it, so you have to input it yourself. And you have to make sure that it's exactly right, that you're following the exact correct formatting. Now you can do a transform to all lowercase, and that might make it a little bit easier. And you could probably also do that substring thing that we talked about earlier, but I have not tried that, so I'm not certain it would work. Where, maybe you wanted to do just a substring of romance or something like that. I do feel like this might end up missing some things if there are things that are improperly cataloged and they don't have the right, the genre term wasn't formatted exactly correctly. Something could fall through. It might be better to do a full report of genres and put that out into Excel and then filter within Excel. That's actually how I would recommend doing that, but it is possible to create that filter yourself. Yeah, so doing that substring, which just takes a portion of the term um, and searches against that, Benjamin says would probably work, but that you would actually end up potentially getting stuff beyond the genre you're looking for. Um, so it might be worth playing around with. But my recommendation really is to just do a full report where you list the genres and then do the filtering in Excel, um, just because you might miss things otherwise. Okay. Any other questions about what we've done today? We have not covered everything that you can report on in bibliographic records, but I think we've hit sort of the main points. Um, but I'm happy to answer questions or look at additional things. I think we are officially at time. Yes, we are. We're at 3:30. So I understand if people need to head out, but if anyone does have additional questions and would like to stay after to ask them, I'm happy to take a look. And for those of you who do have to leave, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. And I will get the recording out so that you can rewatch it if you need to or share it with colleagues. And please continue bringing questions about this our way. I learned a lot about bib record reports in preparing for this, and there's a lot more to learn. So let's see. Joy has asked another question. You could potentially pull all the tags and subfields for items and review for needed corrections. Yes, that's one of the main reasons that you might want to do bibliographic record reports. Obviously things like title and author, you're going to have to hit that bib record table to get, but to do a report that's truly from the bibliographic record table, one of the most useful things for that type of report is for record cleanup. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who was here. I really appreciate it. The great questions. Learned more from uh, presenting today um, than I expected to. All that stuff about the Dewey stuff was great. So send questions my way if you have any, and um, I will go ahead and close this out, but happy to continue the discussion via Basecamp or email. So have a great day.